All right, so we are 4 minutes in. We'll go ahead and get started. This is a recorded session, so anybody that joins late will be able to have access to this information. I wanted to welcome you all. My name is Alejandra Del Toro, and I am the Education and Community Coordinator with Empower Idaho. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Empower Idaho, we are a nonprofit organization of Janus that offers provider trainings, education, and advocacy throughout the state for adults with behavioral health conditions. Within Empower Idaho, one of the things that we offer, again, is the public education opportunities for folks to learn more about behavioral health within the state. More importantly, or more specific to this presentation, on the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. We have a lot of questions of when to use it, what to expect, and more. And so we have 3 awesome subject matter experts with us here today. First off, we have Belinda, who is the Crisis Program Manager for the Center of Excellence Bureau, Adam, who is the Director of Clinical Operations of the Western Idaho Community Crisis Center, and Lee, who is the Director at the Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline. Before we officially get started, a quick overview of the GoToWebinar software. You will see that you have a control panel, and within this control panel, you will have a couple of options as far as communicating with us. You'll find a questions drop-down box, so go ahead and try to locate that right now. Again, it's the questions box. And within that box, what you'll do is put any comments or questions that you have throughout the presentation, and we'll flag them to the presenters at the end of the presentation when we have our Q&A. If you would like a copy of the handout of the PDF slides, that'll be under the handouts drop-down box, also again within the control panel. Everybody in the audience is muted and they do not have access to turn on webcams. So just so you know, the questions box is the only form of communication, whether it's a comment or a question. A reminder that a recording will be available. And lastly, introducing Fran Bennett, who's our incredible ASL interpreter here with us today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Belinda, so we can get going, and thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining, everybody. We're really happy that there's so much interest in learning about the 988 system that's going live in Idaho right now. So initially, what I just want to do is just give a little bit of background of who everybody is that's on the line right now. So like Alejandra said, my name is Belinda. I am the program manager for the Center of Excellence Crisis team. It's a brand new team. So what that means is it's my job to develop the statewide crisis system for Idaho. So if you guys have any questions or comments about that or suggestions, I'd love to hear them. My email address is listed here somewhere, so feel free to drop me a line. I have been with the state for going on, this will be my 10th year. I've been doing crisis response the whole time, started out as a clinician, then got to supervisor, and now I'm doing the program manager for the whole state. So I'm really excited to be here. Lee, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's good to be with all of you this evening. My name is Lee Flynn, and I am the Director of Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline. I've been in this position since May of 2020, so I think I'm bumping up against 2.5 years right now. Previous to this, I had various jobs in nonprofit organizations, including healthcare, and am really excited to be here at the hotline and have the chance to work with others in the crisis care continuum like Belinda and Adam. So I'll hand it over to Adam.
Hi, my name is Adam Moravec. I'm the Director of Operations for the Western Idaho Community Crisis Center located here in Caldwell, Idaho. I have worked here at the Crisis Center for the better part of 3 years, and I have worked in the behavioral health realm for the majority of my adult life. I'm a licensed master's level social worker who is passionate about serving individuals with severe mental illness, severe and persistent mental illness, as well as addressing substance use in our community. I really appreciate everybody attending today.
Great. I'll go ahead and pick it up from here. Let's see if I can. Having a little trouble advancing the slide. Okay, here we go. So let's go ahead and start out. We just want to give an overview of the objectives, the learning objectives for tonight. So there's a lot of interest in 988. It went live on July 16th of this year. So we are going to do an overview of the 988 system. Within that, we're going to do some explaining about the elements of Idaho's crisis care continuum, and also, really kind of articulate and help clarify when a person might call 988, when is the right time and when is the right time to call 911. And also, help everybody understand what might happen, in a typical 988 call. So those with a broad stroke, those are the learning objectives for tonight. All right, essential elements. There are 3 essential elements. I kind of think of it like a 3-legged stool. Part of the continuum that Idaho is building is, first and foremost, someone to call. And so right now that is us at the hotline. The second leg of that stool, the second element, is someone to respond. And that right now is Idaho's mobile crisis teams. And then lastly, somewhere to go. And those places right now are Idaho's crisis centers. And Adam's going to be able to tell us more about that a little later on. So to start out with, on the someone to call, you may or may not know this, but up until July, there was an organization called the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And right around the time that 988 went live, they updated their name to 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's the same organization. And as you can see on the logo, the green and black logo, if you look real close, there's the number that was around forever, the 1-800-273-TALK. So one really important thing to know first off is that 800 number has been replaced by 988. However, the 800 number still works. So if anybody has that number in their phone from a few years back, it'll still dial through. But obviously the beauty of 988 is it's an easy to remember number. And so it's really helpful that everyone be promoting 988 for text and chat. As mentioned, I am the director of Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline. And right now in Idaho, we are responding to Idaho's 988 calls. And we are part of a national network. Slide's a little slow. Okay, there we are. So we are part of the National 988 network. And as it is right now, there are what's known as 988 crisis call centers in every state. And in some states, there are several. If you look at larger states like California or New York, there's more than one 988 call center. But the great thing about this is it really 988 really utilizes the infrastructure that was already in place. And because of this, it means that anybody, anywhere can call 988 and be connected with a live crisis responder. So if you haven't had a chance to call 988 yourself, I would really encourage that you call so you can hear the recording and just know exactly what that sounds like. I always also encourage people to hang up before you're connected to a crisis counselor, unless you're actually in crisis. But when a person calls 988, they receive a message saying you have reached the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and then the person is given 3 options. One option is to press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line. And then in Spanish, there are instructions that the person can press 2 for the Spanish language line. And then the third option was just added within about the last month. And so the third option offers the caller to press 3 for specialized support for LGBTQ individuals under the age of 25. And although the recording doesn't say so, anybody pressing the third option will get connected to the Trevor Project. And even though the Trevor Project, their mission is really to focus on younger people, if somebody older than 25 calls, they will absolutely offer support to that caller. So if a person doesn't choose options 1, 2, or 3, there's a pause, and then the instructions say, stay on the line to be routed to the nearest crisis center in our network. And so when somebody is calling with an Idaho area code, if they don't press one of those options when they stay on the line, they will be routed to Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline. All right. So I just want to touch on a little bit about what happens when a person calls. I find sometimes people are not clear about the kind of support that we provide. So when a person connects with us here at the hotline, a crisis responder will really focus on listening to that person, finding out what's going on with them in that moment. And their whole focus is to help that person reduce their stress, to help them de-escalate if they're feeling escalated, and really help to work and support that person so they can feel empowered to make decisions that are best for them. Throughout the crisis contact, the phone call, our crisis responder will also do a safety assessment and really try to assess the person's safety. And that includes a suicidal assessment for suicidal ideation. It also includes an assessment for homicidal ideation as well. If the person is feeling suicidal, then the crisis responder will engage the person and with their consent, and they will work with that person and support them in creating a safety plan. And safety plans look very different depending on who the person is. For some people, a safety plan in that moment, might be something like self-care. It might be reaching out to a loved one that they can talk to. It might be anything else. It might be petting their dog or cat. Anything that helps calm them and that helps keep them safe. So, most of the time, well, let me just finish this. So we sometimes also provide referrals if the person is looking for a referral, but that's not with every phone call. Most of the phone calls that we take are strictly crisis intervention calls, and most of the time we are able to help de-escalate that person. Gosh, I'm really having trouble with advancing the slides. Okay, there we go. So we really try to get the word out that for us and for other 988 crisis call centers, we really are a resource for a person calling on their own behalf, as well as a person who may want to call for a loved one. And we get a fair amount of calls like that. A lot of times it could be something like a parent who is concerned about a child, or it could be a person concerned about a friend, or anything like that. As I mentioned, most callers are kept safe and de-escalated, and then that is the ideal outcome, and that's mostly possible, but it's not always possible. Sometimes people that engage with us are really in need of a higher level of care. All right, and so when we talk about a higher level of care, our most common referrals are to mobile crisis and to crisis centers. So just a little bit of information on the kinds of information that we would try to get before we did a referral to mobile crisis are these things right here. So when we're calling for community response, here at the hotline, we will ask the person their name, their phone number, and figure out if they're a person calling for themselves or if they're calling about a person of concern. We will ask their date of birth and their address and their phone number, and also their current location. We want to be very clear if they're at home. We want to find out if they're in a parking lot somewhere or any other place. It's also really important that we capture as much information, including mental health diagnoses or symptoms or behavior, any history of hospitalization or any history of suicide attempts and so forth. And then, and then lastly, we really ascertain, whether this person the person calling has access to weapons, or if they have any pets in the home, like for instance, dogs that may be aggressive, or any history of violence. When we partner with mobile crisis, so they can respond to the person's home or other location, we really want to find out what's going on in that location, so we're not sending them into an unsafe situation, so they know what they're going into. And so that's a little bit about that. And I think from here, I think Belinda will pick it up.
Yes, so I'm covering someone to respond. So I'm going to give general information about the mobile response teams across the state. So if a client or a loved one is calling and 988 and they want a welfare check, that will directly go to our teams. The hotline will gather all the necessary informations and then send us the referral in an email format. And then the mobile response teams will reach out to the caller to coordinate the follow-up. If the call is an extremely imminent, dangerous situation, 988 does have the capacity to bypass the mobile response teams and send officers for certain emergencies. And we'll get more into those details a little bit later on. So the intention of the 988 system is to reduce the number of mental health and behavioral health calls to 988. Currently, not all areas in the state have regularly available mobile response teams, but that is one of the working goals for the Division of Behavioral Health. That's going to be my job, is to increase the amount of crisis responders available in the field. If a mobile response team is not available for your call in the moment, we will coordinate with the caller to schedule any face-to-face or field response for an available time slot, or we'll figure out if the person is willing to engage in field response by an officer or paramedic as available in the community. The reason why we are trying to gather so much information from the hotline is, like Lee said, to ensure that the scene is safe for the responders, but also for the client. If there is a pet in the home that gets really easily agitated with strangers, we want to make sure that the scene can be as calm for the client as possible. So that just means maybe putting the dog outside or putting the dog in another room to reduce the tension on the scene with the client and the responders, because they're strangers, right? You don't want to have a situation that's already elevated, having extra variables such as pets. A lot of people have been wondering if calling 988 also alerts the police. So that is not true. Emergency services are only used by the hotline if there is imminent threat of harm, or if the mobile response team deems that there is a clinical justification for safety concerns, and so we will request an assist from the officers. They do not always go in lieu of the mobile response teams. The hotline workers and the mobile response teams are all mandated reporters, either through Vibrant, through the National Lifeline, or through our licensing boards. So that means if someone is believed to be at imminent risk of killing themselves, others, or gravely disabled based on their mental illness, and they're not able to follow through with a safety plan, 988 partners are required to seek assistance from officers to place individuals on mental holds. That doesn't happen nearly as often as our ability to get the people of concern to remain in their homes, in the community, working on safety plans or follow-up care through the hotline or through mobile crisis. We're able to, well, the hotline is able to divert about 80 to 85% of all of our calls and help that person stay in the community. And then of the 10 to 15% of calls that come to the mobile response teams, we're also able to divert about 80% of those. So when you're thinking about it, the amount of times that we're having to go out for a face-to-face response is quite low. And the lowest number is how often we have to take law enforcement. It's very slim. Honestly, we used to know the officers really, really well on a personal basis, but now since we're not calling them as much, we've kind of fallen off. We don't really know a lot of the officers in the field anymore. So when the initial callback comes through, we'll gather some more information, we'll ask some additional clinical questions, and then we'll figure out exactly what level of intervention is needed. The crisis teams respond from what's called the least restrictive perspective. And so that means if we're able to overcome the crisis just by de-escalating somebody on the phone, then that's what we're going to do. We only increase the level of response if it's absolutely needed. So after we try to resolve the issue over the phone, we'll try to engage the client in any level of voluntary treatment that we can. If that means we're going to do crisis centers, if we're going to try to do community resources, set up any types of appointments for them, drive them to a provider appointment, we're going to do anything that we can to divert from a hospitalization. If it's to a point where we're unable to engage in a safety plan with the client through supports, through phone follow-ups and check-ins, multiple days of monitoring, and the client isn't getting any better, still not identifying any symptom improvement, then we'll try to encourage a voluntary hospital admission. That way we don't have any control over their treatment. They're fully in the driver's seat. And then the last option is to initiate the mental hold process or a medical response if needed. There have been times where we go to calls and the mental health symptoms are actually a direct result of a medical condition. And so we'll try to get those individuals into the hospital so that their medical needs can be addressed. So it's important to address our interactions with law enforcement because I know that is a big concern for people in the community. The way that the mobile response teams utilize, well, I guess engage in a relationship with law enforcement is kind of fourfold. We do a lot of work to train officers and increase the knowledge base for the patrol officers going out in the community. So we do a lot of CIT 40 is what the training is called. So it's a 1-week training where we cover a lot of different mental health and behavioral health concerns. We encourage co-responder units so that there is at least a social worker or a counselor on shift with the officers or deputies. The officers can request for a mobile response team co-response in the field. We try to make ourselves as easily available as humanly possible. And oftentimes when we show up, as long as we feel that there is no imminent need for a mental hold, we usually tell the officers to clear the scene, and then they go on their merry way for patrol, and we continue on with the behavioral health response to limit the amount of time the officers are on scene with the client and to limit the amount of iatrogenic harm for the client. They can also call us for history if they're going out on a call and we don't have capacity to arrive with them or take the call for them. That way they have an idea of what to expect based on past history in regards to symptoms, how the person responds best to helpers, and just give them tips and tricks on how best to interact with that individual. If we're out in the field and the scenario is becoming a little bit more aggressive or agitated or unsafe than what we initially were there for, then we can also call officers just for field safety assistance. And what that looks like is they just show up, kind of stand off to the side and behind us. They're not the ones engaging in the interaction. They're basically just there to make sure that everybody stays safe. And then finally, post engagement, either with the officer or with a co-response team, if they want one of the mobile response teams to follow up with a client that they were just talking to, we totally will. Well, we have a program that's called a crisis enrollment, where the crisis teams can track the case for up to 7 days based on clinical discretion and the level of interaction and desire to communicate with us from the client. And then, so how do we know when these calls get sent to the mobile response teams, or when do these calls get sent to 911? So Health and Welfare developed an acuity matrix that was provided to the hotline. And so all three aspects of the 988 crisis care continuum have access to this matrix. So we can ensure that we're all responding to the call the same. So based on safety questions and dedicated attempts to de-escalate and mitigate risk, either the hotline or the mobile response teams will only call 911 if there is a belief that the client's life is actually in danger right then and there. Typically, if an assist is needed by EMS or an officer, the non-emergency dispatch line is called, which basically just means that fewer officers or fewer paramedics show up, no lights and sirens. They're not speeding through the neighborhoods or anything like that. It's a different response protocol. So the other partner that we work with in the first response system are fire, EMS, and paramedics. Very similar relationships with these guys as with the officers. We have historically had opportunities to create collaborative teams across the state, including psychiatric emergency teams, where we have paired clinicians with paramedics. However, once COVID came and all of the paramedics had to go back onto ambulances for medical concerns, we've been trying to get that back on board. The community paramedics can also request mobile response teams. So if they're on scene and they think that it's mental health related and the client is medically cleared, then the mobile response teams can go out and follow up on those cases as we would any other call. So if mobile response teams can also call the EMS or paramedics for medically cleared individuals or medically compromised individuals, sorry. And then there are different community paramedic programs across the state that can do a follow-up program that's very similar to the mobile response follow-up programs. So if a mental hold is initiated, that case will be routed to the designated exam process, which is on different teams. If a mental hold is not initiated, there are a variety of follow-ups that the 988 system can do. We can reroute to the hotline for short-term phone support, or the mobile response teams can do crisis case management or complex treatment referrals. These are the most used follow-up programs with the mobile response teams. These are the crisis enrollments. These are the cases where we're helping them get into a very difficult treatment program that requires a lot of background work. And then we're happy to interact with multiple systems to get something done, whether that's adult protection, other DD or other DHW programs such as developmental disabilities, the YES program, children's mental health, Medicaid or CPS. We work quite a lot with schools and SROs to try and improve the juveniles' stability both at school and at home. And then the other category of people that we work with very frequently are behavioral health providers.
All right, so once again, my name is Adam, and I'm going to be covering the third piece of the 988 crisis continuum of care, which is the crisis center model that is somewhere to go. The state of Idaho currently has 7 crisis centers spread out across the state. Crisis centers are a place where adults in behavioral health or substance use crisis can access immediate support from a behavioral health professional. Clients receive food, a bed, and professional guidance and support in managing their ongoing crisis needs. Individuals are admitted to the crisis center for 24-hour periods. If an individual continues to experience crisis needs past the 24-hour allotted time frame that is allotted by the facility, some facilities are able to readmit the individual so as to provide ongoing support. Crisis centers can support individuals with detoxing from mind-altering substances, as well as support individuals with ongoing psychiatric needs. And once again, I have listed here the 7 crisis centers that are located across the state of Idaho. I will now provide you with a brief virtual tour of the Western Idaho Community Crisis Center, which is located in Caldwell, Idaho, and serves Region 3. The Division of Behavioral Health, as contracted with Beacon Health Options, created a statewide system of crisis centers across the state of Idaho. All crisis centers function under the same model and set of guidelines as directed by the state of Idaho and other involved entities, such as the public health entities, Department of Health and Welfare, etc. I hope that this virtual tour will give you an idea of what a crisis center looks like. I'm going to go ahead and attempt to upload the tour, and if it doesn't work, I recommend that you take a look at the PDF slides, at which point you can access the link and take a tour yourself. But we are going to give it a shot. So let's see.
Welcome to the Western Idaho Community Crisis Center. Let me show you what we've got going on in here. So here we have a security
So it looks like we're kind of having some audio issues, but as you can see, this is this little area right up here at the front is where a client completes a medical screening, either with a nurse or an EMT. Clients' personal belongings are held in that area back over there, the sort of closet-looking area. And within the crisis center, we try to make it as homely as we can. I understand, you know, an institutional environment is not always the best place for an individual who is in a behavioral health or substance use crisis, but I will probably just direct you to go ahead and complete this tour on the PDF provided. So I'm actually going to attempt to pause this. Let's see. Okay. I'm just going to minimize that. I apologize, there's a slight delay. So once again, our facility, we have 10 male beds, 10 female beds, and we run 24/7 staff. So upon admission to a crisis center, clients receive a basic medical screening as completed by an EMT or nurse. As part of this screening, we may check an individual's blood pressure, pulse, respiratory rate, O2 stats, blood glucose levels, temperature, and if needed, CWA protocol may be implemented. CWA stands for the Clinical Institute Withdrawal Assessment for Alcohol. Such an assessment is critical when determining how best to support an individual who is actively detoxing from alcohol. Following the completion of basic medical screening, clients will meet with a behavioral health professional in order to receive immediate crisis intervention and support. Counseling, skills training, and psychoeducation may be provided to the client as needed. Depending upon the level of acuity, clients who are experiencing suicidal thoughts will complete a crisis assessment as well as a safety plan with a behavioral health professional, and they will be discharged back into the community with follow-up resources having been provided. If it is determined that an individual would benefit from accessing a higher level of care, staff may assist the client in accessing a local behavioral health unit on a voluntary basis. If a secure psych transport is available, that is a secure psychiatric transport, and the client in question is determined to be medically stable, crisis centers may be able to bypass the emergency room altogether, thus transporting the individual in question directly to the behavioral health unit. Other services offered include non-medical detox, that is, detox from mind-altering substances that doesn't require supervision from a physician in a high acuity setting, such as a hospital. Crisis centers may also function as a safe environment for psychiatric stabilization. For example, an individual who is struggling with depression who has recently started psychiatric medication but feels unsafe at home may access the crisis center for immediate support, treatment planning, as well as follow-up. Additionally, individuals with psychosis may access the crisis center as a safe environment where they can stabilize on their medication that they have brought with them during the intake process. The crisis center also functions as a safe environment where individuals who are experiencing trauma, grief, or symptoms of panic and anxiety can seek stability and comfort in a non-judgmental professional setting. Crisis centers may also provide short-term case management as well as peer-based services. Case managers can assist with linkage to mental health as well as substance use resources in the community. Additionally, case management staff can assist with linkage to domestic violence resources for individuals in crisis. Human trafficking resources are a point of foci that have recently been spearheaded by local crisis centers. Pathways Community Crisis Center of Idaho, located in Boise, as well as the Western Idaho Community Crisis Center in Caldwell, have partnered with the Idaho Anti-Trafficking Coalition in order to identify victims of human trafficking, as well as to provide temporary respite while said individuals await safe placement and housing away from their perpetrators. Lastly, case managers may provide assistance around accessing housing resources, harm reduction supplies, hygiene products, as well as food and clothing donations. I have included Maslow's hierarchy of needs because I feel it is important to conceptualize and demonstrate how basic human needs function to promote resilience and self-actualization for the community members we serve. By assisting individuals with their basic human needs, we are directly and indirectly promoting crisis stabilization. Who is appropriate for the crisis center? Adult crisis centers in Idaho can serve individuals 18 and older. Individuals must be voluntary and they must be able to consent to treatment. Furthermore, clients must exhibit medical stability as determined by an EMT, nurse, or CNA upon admission. Clients must also be able to ambulate on their own or with the assistance of supportive devices such as a wheelchair or walker. It is important that clients be able to perform activities of daily living on their own, that is, showering, bathing, hygiene, and feeding. Ultimately, the client defines their own crisis. This is part of a no wrong door policy. Furthermore, crisis centers across the state accept referrals and drop-offs from law enforcement and other community partners.
So at this point, Alejandra did gather a bunch of questions from the registrants. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cover all of those that we haven't covered in the PowerPoint. And then at the end of that, whatever Alejandra has from questions from the webinar, we'll be happy to answer at that time. So let's just get started. One of the questions was, where will folks be referred if their crisis risk of suicide is directly related to an unwanted pregnancy? So currently, the crisis hotline forwards these calls to mobile crisis, and the state has identified that the mobile response teams can provide resources for information only. We do not provide any encouragement or, against any ideas against the unwanted pregnancy. We do not provide any type of decision-making information. What we will do is help de-escalate the crisis, help that caller feel supported, And then if they are asking for any types of resources that are known in the community, we provide the information with no judgment held either way. The next question was, are crisis counselors trained to intervene with autism spectrum disorder, intellectually disabled, SMI, which is severe mental illness, adults and youth? Lee, do you want to go ahead and take that one?
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in. So our crisis responders have foundational training in a variety of areas, including, I would say, just foundational mental health. So as such, we are not experts in mental health. This is a good example of how, when we receive a call, our crisis responder would, again, gather as much information as possible. I would say it's fairly common for a person to share, if they have a diagnosis, they often share it with us, which is really helpful. We do not diagnose, but if someone shares their diagnosis with us, we find that helpful because it just helps inform what our response and what our support is. And I would say with the examples in this question, these are really great examples of where we would partner with mobile crisis and their expertise and being able to really support that person, that individual in person, if that were possible.
So specifically for the mobile response teams, we do receive trainings on co-occurring disorders with autism, with intellectual disabilities. We have been specifically trained with children's mental health crisis response. Our team has both children experts and adult experts, and we've been cross-training for about 2 years now. We used to have separate response teams, but we determined that that was silly, so we just have one team now. And then on any cases that we struggle with, we will reach out to the experts in that. So if there's an intellectual or developmental case, then we'll reach out to our DD team at Health and Welfare because they know all of the things. They're a fantastic resource for us. And then we also will reach out into the community for other experts in areas that we feel are necessary above and beyond what we're able to do. Is there a guarantee 988 will utilize crisis teams more than police? For example, Region 1 is losing state funding. What happens now? Like I had mentioned before, the hotline has been diverting about 80 to 85% of our calls. We've been doing this 988 pilot program since May, and so we've been finding really good data since that pilot rollover. We are currently now rolling over our daytime calls. We started with Region 2, and then Region 7, which is Eastern Idaho. And then next up is Region 6. And then we'll just kind of roll out the other regions, kind of increasing in number of calls to the hotline so that they can adequately prepare themselves for the influx of calls. So of the calls that the hotline will forward to mobile crisis, we again are diverting about 80 to 85% of those calls away from field response altogether. Referrals to law enforcement remain low. Oh God, sorry. I'm in an office with windows and the deer are walking by. It scared the heck out of me. The referrals to law enforcement remain low, and we will continue to progress in that direction as we onboard additional mobile response teams. What happens after the 988 call? Any follow-up, Lee?
Sure. For a 988 call, assuming it's a call where there's no higher level of support needed, it's a crisis intervention call. The hotline offers, if a person calls, let me say it this way, when a person calls and if they are feeling suicidal, if they have any level of suicidal ideation, we offer a follow-up call to that individual. And at that point, the individual chooses to say yes to having us do a follow-up call with them within 24 hours, or they sometimes decline, and it's completely up to that person. It is their choice. We often have a person decline, and they'll say something like, no, I think I'm good. And then sometimes the opposite is true. Someone will say, yeah, I would really like to get a call tomorrow. So that's our most common type of follow-up, and it is, yeah, it's a really good thing. I think it helps a lot of people.
For the mobile response teams, we base our follow-up on clinical justification. If there's no clinical justification for follow-up, we're not going to impose ourselves on those individuals any more than we already have. We're a bunch of strangers coming into your life, and nobody likes that. So we try to minimize our impact on the client's life as much as possible. There are times, however, when the client requests follow-up, so we're happy to oblige that. And then there are the occasions where the client is decompensating to the point where we're worried about them and their ability to take care of themselves in the community and maintain safety for themselves and others. And so we'll ask if we can follow up with them. Sometimes they say no, and so as a way to respect their wishes, we will try to find a collateral contact that they're comfortable with us talking to try and gather information that way to see if we can help divert away from hospitalization through trying to engage that person in safety planning or crisis plans to try to get people in for services, again, to divert away from any unnecessary hospitalizations.
And regarding the crisis center, I was just going to add that we do complete a 24-hour follow-up, a 1-week follow-up, and then as well as a 2-week and then a 30-day follow-up, just to ensure that the individual has accessed and connected with any resources provided at the crisis center, as well as to see if maybe they have access to an emergency room, a behavioral health unit, just to really track and make sure that they are receiving the support that they need. And an individual is always welcome back to the crisis center if there are still prevailing and ongoing crisis needs.
All right, I'll go ahead and jump in on this one. So the question is, could you talk about if individuals can call and talk to a clinician that are feeling suicidal but are not having intent or a plan for suicide? And I would say a lot of our calls to the hotline would fall into this category. So the answer is yes, a person can call and talk to a crisis responder. You know, I forgot to say at the beginning, but you know, people calling the hotline call for a variety of reasons. Many call because they are feeling suicidal. Within that, sometimes they have a plan, sometimes the individual does not have a plan. You know, just different, there are just different types of situations. Just as many people that call on any given month who are feeling suicidal, another common reason for calling is people struggling with self-described mental health challenges. And I say self-described because, again, we do not diagnose, but we do get a lot of people reaching out and calling us because they're struggling with anxiety, depression, you know, or suicidal ideation. So we are always here, and we are happy to talk to anybody feeling any of those things.
Yeah, these types of calls don't necessarily result in higher responses simply because someone says that they're suicidal. Once the hotline de-escalates or manages the call as best they can, if it gets routed to the mobile response teams, we have so much training in regards to suicidality, homicidality, grave disability, and we work really hard to suss out the details of suicidality, figure out if it's related to medical conditions, medication, grief and loss, stress, breakups, all sorts of things. And we try really hard to mitigate all of those risk factors for those individuals to maintain their existence in the community in their homes. Suicidal thoughts are often a symptom of a bigger environmental situation, which when identified and addressed tend to resolve just the general acute nature of those thoughts.
And I was going to say a number of individuals who access the crisis center are just experiencing suicidal thoughts, and we are able to discharge them back into the community because, once again, this is a voluntary facility. We cannot place an individual on a hold, and our main goal is to avoid hospitalization if it is not necessary, to avoid the emergency room if it is not necessary. And so we do our best to really, assess whether an individual has the plan, means, intent, method, etc., just so they can return home safely with follow-up resources, support, and move forward from there.
And then one of the last questions was, how will this new crisis line be advertised to the communities in Idaho? So the 988 project manager has developed radio ads, social media ads, billboard ads that if you drive around the state, they're in a variety of places. I've had to take a few work trips recently, and I've seen 3 or 4 different billboards across the state. The crisis system partners have also been provided with 988 cards, magnets. So I've made sure that all of the crisis teams have boxes of cards to hand out to their law enforcement partners, community providers, and other crisis stakeholders such as hospital emergency rooms as well. And then we also ensure that everybody has the link to the SAMHSA website where you can order stickers, brochures, and flyers. And I'm pretty sure that all of those resources are free as well. So these messages will continue to increase over time as the daytime rollover nears completion across the state. So we started out with a soft advertisement just because we want to make sure that the hotline has the capacity to take on these additional calls. And then by January, the advertising will be pretty regular, pretty constant. So at this time, those were all of the questions that we had. So Alejandra, if you had any additional questions, now is the time.
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for all of that great information. I personally learned a lot from the session, and I can imagine the attendees did as well. So we have 2 questions that came through. The first one is, are callers who are non-Idaho area code routed to the call center associated with the caller's area code? What happens then, and is the call then routed to an Idaho call center?
Sure, I'll jump in and take that. So right now, and I always have to preface this with, we have no control over this in Idaho. We all, wish this could be different, but right now, the 988 Lifeline, they route calls based on, the national system routes calls based on the caller's area code. So my cell phone is a 208 area code. So if I call 988, I'm going to be routed to Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline. Friends of mine that maybe moved from Washington, if a person has a 503 area code, they can be in Meridian, Idaho, and they can call 988 or anywhere in Idaho. They will be routed by their area code. So in that example, a person would be routed to a crisis call center in Washington. So that's not ideal. That is something that is expected to change in the future, where routing will be based on the person's location. Meaning you could have any area code, but if you're calling from if you're calling from Coeur d'Alene, you're going to be routed to us here in Idaho. So the most important thing to know, though, is regardless of where a person's call gets routed, when you call 988, a person will reach a live person. You will reach a crisis responder or a crisis counselor. And I know every day we get calls from people who are out of state. And it's typically somebody that had a 208, used to live in Idaho. They have a 208 area code, and now they live in Minnesota or whatever. And so in that situation, it really, as far as crisis intervention and de-escalation, it really doesn't matter where the person's living. You know, crisis responders can help support that person regardless of where they're calling from. You know, if the person ends up needing resources or a higher level of care, you know, it's pretty easy these days to kind of track down resources using the internet. And so, you know, no matter where a person calls from, they will be supported. Their call will not be forwarded to that crisis call center in that state. And the reason for that is to just not bounce the person around, not bounce the caller around to a bunch of places, but give them the support that they need based on whichever crisis call center gets that call.
Thank you, Lee.
The entity in charge of the geolocation is the FCC. And so once they figure out how to georeference or geolocate for 988 like they do for 911, that capability will come down the pipe. But right now, that is one of the limitations for this 988 system.
Thanks, Belinda. All right, and the second question is there any special messaging going to our high school students?
I'll take a shot at that. So as far as messaging going to high school students, I know as far as the hotline, we work pretty closely with the State Department of Education and their Idaho Lives program. And so I know, because I meet regularly with the folks from Idaho Lives, they do a lot of work in the schools across Idaho. And one of the things that they do is they do carry the message of 988 out everywhere they go. So I know that that is one thing happening. And I'm not sure, Adam or Belinda, do you know of other efforts?
So in the schools where the administration is in favor of mental health resources, 988 is being pushed fairly heavily. There are areas in the state where unfortunately constituents are not okay with mental health resources being available in schools. And so they have been suing school boards to keep mental health resources such as 988 or peer supports for high school students out of the schools. So that is an active thing that school boards and health and welfare and just community partners in general are facing right now. But a lot of the information that we have provided through 988 stakeholder meetings since March, we had monthly meetings